Alright, check it out. Angry Steve, author of the Bill of Gripes. I'm back again. Yes, sorry to say so. But just wanted to give you guys your first video update, as I promised. You know, the momentum's been building with the Bill of Gripes. I've been getting some great responses. But I didn't quite get enough to put together a really nice top 10 list for last week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the best response that I got. Luis says, the Federal Reserve and the control it has over our country's wealth is her #1 gripe. The Fed is a private bank run by unelected officials who are not required to be open or accountable to we the people. Bring back the gold standard. Indeed, it's a good point she brings up, see, because what most people don't realize about the Federal Reserve is that it literally conjures money out of thin air. Now, I know that sounds like a pretty abstract idea, you know, I mean, I know your granddad said, oh, money doesn't grow on trees, you know, it doesn't come out of thin air, but you know what, for the Federal Reserve, it helps to own your own printing press, and for them, it basically comes out of thin fucking air. Yeah, but seriously, ever since the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, money is no longer backed by its equivalent in gold, which means that this here dollar bill is basically just ink, paper, and a series of symbols that we choose to regard as real. You know, every American has a very real way of, you know, thinking about money. Some of us think in terms of debt, you know, which is nothing more than the money the banks printed at no cost to themselves in exchange for the interest you pay in order to use that money in order to purchase real world goods. That makes sense? It's called a loan. Rather than simply being a system of exchange, though, by which we trade real wealth for, quote, symbolic wealth, the Fed has turned this into a system of control. Now, it's important to note systems of control don't work unless we, the people, acquiesce to being controlled. Anyway, we've diverged from the topic at hand, which is money, which of course is also one of many inalienable rights. We each instinctively know that money is a tool that allows us to exchange wealth, pursue happiness, you know, and expand our own personal vision of liberty and life. Now, you might scoff at the idea that money buys liberty. I mean, you know, intrinsically, we're all free, but don't fool yourself into thinking that wealth isn't the key to fuller self-expression. I mean, while we're all free to live the way we choose, money buys plane tickets and whiskey and designer jeans. It buys a lot of things we'd all like to have if we simply had the money to afford them. So the first thing to understanding how the Fed controls you is to understand your own attachment to money. I mean, it's important. You can live without it, sure, but who wants to? Now back to that system of control, right? Here's where that proverbial genie got bottled into the ultimate feel-good remedy. See, our founding fathers, and of course their mothers and wives who nurtured their empty stomachs and overburdened minds, let's not forget them. Our founding fathers held great concern over the control of our nation's currency. Article 1 of Section 8 of the Constitution safeguards the people's interest as represented by Congress having the sole right to print and circulate the government's currency. Now, in 1913, when Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve into law, he is quoted as saying, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." Now, even he realized that he'd forfeited our government's control over its currency to an elite group of private financiers and lenders, some of whom represent foreign interests. Now, today, rather than controlling our own currency and debt, this coalition of banks places printing orders with the Treasury. Then they use that currency to purchase securities from the U.S. government, you know, government bonds, that kind of thing, on which those banks then collect interest. The government then takes that printed money to pay for goods and services that benefit us, the American people. I mean, it's a cool system, right? Not exactly. See, in 1913, another organization was also founded called the IRS, charged with managing an altogether new source of revenues called income tax. Indeed, in order to pay back the bonds issued by our government, private citizens began paying income tax in order to compensate for our nation's debts. What's more, because our government pays interest on those bonds and securities, 40% of our income tax annually goes to pay interest on our ever-increasing national debt. Anyway, ever wonder why our national debt has become so huge? Here's why. Because the same banks that lend money to our government also finance the political campaigns of both major parties. In fact, 2 parties is the smallest number of choices that you can have so that it still feels like a choice. Ironic? Ever get the feeling that both Democrats and Republicans are really just 2 sides of the same coin? That's because they are. See, politics is all about spending money and collecting debt on behalf of the Fed. It's called the boom and bust cycle, dominated by a fluctuating welfare to warfare state. When we're not spending money on war and then selling, those tanks, bombs, and guns to foreign countries, well, we're spending it on exorbitant social programs that, while they are beneficial to the American people, tend to operate off ridiculous budgets without the smallest degree of fiscal accountability. While this may sound extreme, it gets worse. See, these banks take those government securities, those bonds, and then sell them to private citizens at a lower interest rate. So now they're still collecting interest and can use that interest and the money obtained from selling the bond to buy more debt. Yep, that's their business, the business of acquiring debt. Whether it's your car, my house, or your best friend's business, they're in it to collect our debt, so that the next time the economy constricts, they've consolidated all that real-world wealth, and their loss is absolutely zero. Because remember, they printed that money out of thin air. With the Fed in existence, there is only one logical and ultimate conclusion to the way they operate: a bankrupt American economy. Now, that may sound extreme too, but that is the only logical outcome of an economy that functions solely to consolidate wealth into the hands of a minority. That's America. So if you still think you're a free man, right, ask yourself this: what is a man, or his government, whose life is owned by creditors? I mean, between the interest they collect and the leverage they inflict, there is very little that goes on in America, in politics and private life, that is beyond the influence of the Federal Reserve. I mean, they even own massive shares in our media providers. Get the picture? If that picture disturbs you, don't worry, I got something else I want to read for you. But in the meantime, let me say this: if you truly want to abolish the Fed, start by recognizing your inherent right to wealth. See, money that isn't backed by gold or some other standard of real-world measure is an illusion. It represents no real loss to the bank. The money you sweat to spend is nothing. I mean, really, it's an illusion, and you're entitled to so much more as an American citizen. See, you're actually entitled to the services your government provides at no cost to you. The only problem is that you no longer have the right to print your own money to pay for those services. Consider that fact. I mean, whose interest are you paying for? Are you being taxed without representation? We need to ask ourselves whether it's not time for a revolution. Now here's the thing. I mean, a revolution need not occur by force. I mean, since all we really have to do is refuse to acknowledge these systems of control. But if force be the necessary means, I leave you with this quote from The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. "And the great owners who must lose their land in an upheaval, the great owners with access to history, with eyes to read that history and to know the great fact that when property accumulates in too few hands, it is taken away. And that companion fact that when a majority of the people are hungry and cold, they will take by force what they need. And the little screaming fact that sounds through all history, that repression works only to strengthen and knit the repressed. The great owners ignored these three cries of history. The land fell into fewer hands, the number of the dispossessed increased, and every effort of the great owners was directed at repression. The money was spent for arms, for gas to protect the great holdings, and spies were sent to catch the murmuring of revolt so that it might be stamped out. The changing economy was ignored, plans for the change ignored, and only means to destroy revolt were considered, while the causes of revolt went on. The tractors which throw men out of work, the belt lines which carry loads, the machines which produce, all were increased, and more families scampered on the highways looking for crumbs from the great holdings, lusting after the land beside the roads. The great owners formed associations for protection, and they met to discuss ways to intimidate, to kill, to gas, and always they were in fear of a principle. 300,000. If they ever move under a leader, the end. 300,000 hungry and miserable. If they ever know themselves, the land will be theirs, and all the gas and all the rifles in the world won't stop them. And the great owners, who had become through their holdings both more and less than men, ran to their destruction, and used every means that in the long run would destroy them. Every little means, every violence, every raid on a Hooverville, every deputy swaggering through a ragged camp put off the day a little, but cemented the inevitability thereof. Angry Steve, over and out.